is about what we usually call home equity theft. Home equity theft is what happens when instead of taking what's owed in property taxes, the government takes an entire home from somebody. It's essentially legalized home equity theft. The most extreme example actually came out of Michigan when Yuri Raffaelli accidentally underpaid his taxes by $8. Instead of taking just the $8 that it was owed, plus a couple $100 in penalties and interest, Oakland County, Michigan actually took his entire house, sold it at auction for almost $25,000, and then kept all the money. Now, fortunately, we were able to win Yuri's case in the Michigan Supreme Court. But as it turns out, there were many other states doing essentially the same thing. And one of those states was Minnesota. So we represented Geraldine Tyler. She is now, I think she's still 94 years old. And what happened was she moved out of her condo in Minneapolis that she lived in for about a decade into a senior living community and stopped paying her property taxes on her former home. And rather than just take what it was owed, Hennepin County took her entire condo. So she owed about $2,300 in property taxes after accounting for penalties, interest, administrative costs, all of that. It was $15,000 that she owed. And the county sold it at auction for $40,000. But instead of just taking the $15,000, the county kept all $40,000. So we call that essentially legalized home equity theft. The Supreme Court has a conference where they consider cert petitions. They granted one of the petitions, and that was Miss Tyler's case. And then it was essentially off to the races. Oral argument was in April. Actually, we got an opinion in less than a month from the time of oral argument. So that was shockingly fast. I was surprised, and it was unanimous. And they unanimously agreed with us that this was a taking of private property without just compensation. Yes, the government can take your property and seize and sell it to collect what it's owed. But when it takes more than what it's owed, that is a taking. And the government has to pay you just compensation for that. The best line from the opinion, I think, was, and Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion, it was, a taxpayer must render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but no more. And I think that nicely sums it all up. So it was a lot of fun getting to argue the case, though. It was a dream come true. So I've done, appellate arguments at the circuit courts, and I did an argument at the Michigan Supreme Court. And at the oral argument at the Michigan Supreme Court, my knees were actually shaking. I was very nervous. Nobody could see, and you wouldn't know I was that nervous by listening, but I was very nervous inside. But at the U.S. Supreme Court, all I can say is a lot of people were praying for me. I mean, I had like 4 churches praying for me because I had so much fun and my knees did not shake. And, was I nervous? Sure. Yeah. But it was more like a fun nervous instead of my knees are shaking. We were the only case argued that day. We were actually the last case of the term. And so there was no one arguing before or after me that day, and which was good because our argument went long. The nice thing is before oral argument, there's a lot of attorneys and they're getting sworn into the Supreme Court bar. I had gone to argument the 2 days before just to try to be a little bit less awestruck by the courtroom, by the justices, just to try to get more comfortable in the space. And so I'd gone the 2 days before, and they were cases that were a bit more, procedural kind of technical cases, and certainly with less interesting facts than what you have here, with Miss Tyler's case, less shocking facts, at least. And so what I noticed when I started arguing, and that sort of, surprised me and added to me being a little bit starstruck, I guess, was that the justices were leaning in. Most of them were leaning in and listening. They were genuinely interested in what I was going to say. And so that was an amazing feeling. Yeah. It didn't all rest on my shoulders. Truth has its own power. And so I didn't feel as if everything was on me because I was just so clearly on the side of justice that it felt as if I was essentially just standing next to the truth and saying, look, guys, here it is. So it kind of took some of the pressure off, actually. By the end of our oral argument, I had a pretty good sense that it looked like we were going to win, and it wouldn't even be close. And that's exactly what happened. We won unanimously. So that was really fantastic. I loved going to Ave. And, I think it was a solid legal education, right? And I enjoyed it. I liked the faith and reason. And for me, that was just actually, on a personal note, that was the core of what I was doing. I was acting with reason, but I'd prayed that my petition would be granted. I had prayed for good timing. I had this other case that was pending. I prayed we'd get an opinion in time, that we would have a circuit court split. So that, a circuit court split is a very good way to get your case up to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's helpful to getting the court to grant your case. And all of those things happened. And so for me, it really was truly, it was sort of my personal motto, right, on this case. It was faith and reason. But faith was a huge part of it. God is not separate from justice, right? God is the origin of justice. And there's just so many scriptures that talk about the importance of not oppressing the poor and not abusing the poor. And so I never felt as if this was my fight. I always felt as if this was, even though it's really been, like, I've litigated more of these cases than anybody out there, as far as I know, at least on the constitutional issue, I should say. There's people who've tried, like, who've done a lot of due process cases and that sort of thing. But on the constitutional question of whether it's a taking without just compensation, I've done a lot of these cases, but it never felt as if it was just my fight. It felt as if I was standing on the shoulders of those who went before me, because you literally have hundreds of years of common law tradition. And granted, most of it was, pre 1900s. But you have this amazing common law tradition. And then I would look to the scriptures and they would just say, that God cares about how you treat the poor and he cares about justice. And so it never felt as if it was just my fight. And it wasn't. I still believe, that God intervened to give us the timing we needed to get to the Supreme Court. You have to work hard. You have to be relentless. And you probably need, if you want to go all the way to the Supreme Court, you probably need to get a team around you that can help you get there, because it's a lot. It is a lot. I mean, there's an enormous amount of preparation that went into it. Years of practice. And then you go and you do oral arguments in court, and you practice quite a lot leading up to arguing at the Supreme Court. So that's really, as far as preparation goes, that's the preparation. It was a lot of fun.